Thank you for joining me. This is the second in our fall webinar series on the topic of buying a home, and I already own one. So actually on Tuesday of this week, I talked about buying a home for the first timer, and I'm going to repeat that one here in about a month or two. That's a popular topic. And so these are just meant to be educational. We're going to record these as well, but you may want to share these with a friend, family, coworker, or they may be useful to you in the future as you think about if you own a house right now, what could that look like? These are very common discussion points we have with clients. So I wanted to bring this to you and give you how the logic works of that. So I'm just going to head forward and move into it. I'm going to do some screen share as we go forward. So give me 2 seconds to get all set. And by the way, there is that question and answer. Feel free to chime in at any time if you have a question. I've already had a couple of people say, hey, would you be sure to address this? And yes, I'm going to include that. By the way, we could get really deep and do a PowerPoint and all that, but I thought let's just make this super simple. Let's just go straight with a Word document. I'm just going to kind of give you my notes. I'm going to also show you a spreadsheet as we go forward, okay? Let me fix one thing here. There we go. We're going. All right. So buying a home and I already own one. Well, let me say one consideration for those folks is they might want to consider, do they want to take their current home and turn it into a rental property? Let me say that topic right there by itself is a whole separate webinar that I'm doing here in a couple of weeks. I'm going to table that one, but I will say it is a consideration that some people go through. And that might be something you want to consider as well. There are pros and cons to that, but that's a bigger discussion point. Let's just head forward here. So buying before you sell. Sorry, I don't know why that's moving forward like that. So should I sell before I buy? Well, what does that do for me? What are the advantages to that? Well, there are. So number one, you would have the money from your current home. That's probably obvious. That's nice because many people, especially if they've owned a home for any length of time, they've got a lot of equity in it. Home values rose a lot over the last couple of years. So that would be nice to have that equity. So that's probably obvious, but that's an advantage of it. You're then released from that mortgage. You don't have those property taxes, home insurance, HOA dues. You're free from that obligation. Talk more about that in a second. What happens if you buy before you sell? Well, your stress level goes down, that's for sure, because you're going to realize, wow, I'm not carrying two homes at the same time. I think for anyone, that relieves some stress. Well, that's a factor. For some people, they're just like, oh boy, that would just give me so much anxiety. I can't deal with it. I don't want to deal with that. That's okay. Just got to know it. You might be able to arrange a lease back from a seller. This is if you sell before you buy, meaning that you could sell it and maybe you could be able to arrange with your buyer that you could stay in the home for a period of time, maybe a month or 2 months. Typically, if your buyer is buying the home as their primary residence, and this is what most people are doing, they can allow you a lease back for up to 60 days. Up to 60 days. So that's something to consider. That might be possible, especially when it's a competitive market. We see that. I realize the buyer wants to move into your home. You're selling it. They want to buy it. They want to move in, but they might go, well, I'm renting right now. Maybe they're in an apartment. And if they could get your house they might be flexible to give a lease back. Also, let me point out, of course, when you sell your home, I want you to get top dollar, but you might consider, well, yeah, I want to get top dollar, but you know what? Would it be worth it to me to maybe take $4,000 less if my buyer gave me a lease back for 60 days? That gives you a longer runway to be able to find your next home. These are considerations to have. You might have to make an interim move between house A and house B. We don't like to think about that. Doesn't sound really fun, but sometimes that happens. Here's a couple of things I've seen people do when they have that. Now, again, they might arrange a lease back, but maybe they do a short-term rental. Maybe they've got a friend. Maybe they have an Airbnb. I know one family that when they sold their house, they were going to have a little move. They didn't find the next house right away. They kind of made it fun, and they rented a short-term apartment downtown Dallas, and wherever you are, and they just go, this isn't normally how we live, but it made them kind of feel like they were living in New York City. I've had that happen. I also had an interesting situation with a client that now this depends a little bit on the school year, and if your children are in school or homeschooled or wherever they are. But what they did, it was the summertime, and they sold their house. They wanted to be able to have all that cash, be able to be diligent about the house they thought about buying, and they went and rented an Airbnb out of town, kind of at the lake. I had one couple do it in Colorado for a couple of months. Bear in mind, you're going to have all that money from the sale of your house, so you're probably going to be able to handle it. They did an Airbnb and kind of made a vacation out of it, made it fun. So it's something to think about. Now, of course, if you do that, realize you're going to be also looking at homes. So you're going to be coming in town a fair amount. So that's something to think about. Just depends on the situation. So those are just a couple of the considerations about selling before buying. I think that it's kind of obvious what some of the perks are, but we also need to think of the flip side of this. So what if I buy before I sell? Well, there's pros and cons there as well. Okay. So what do those look like? Well, number one is, a con is you don't have the equity from your current home. I guess that's obvious, but it's just something to really think about. You still have the payment on your current home. I mean, you really do. You are still obligated to that house, number one. So you have to be able to just realize that could add your stress level. Okay. Now, let me make a little notation here that I think is important to think about. What if you own your current home free and clear? I have a client right now who actually is going to close in the next couple of days, and he owns a home free and clear. He's buying another home. He is going to carry a mortgage on that new home. And he said, well, why are you asking me questions about my current house? And he meant it respectfully, but he said, why do you care about my current house? I don't owe anything on it. I said, well, that's great. I'm glad you don't owe anything on it. However, you have to pay property taxes on it. You have to pay home insurance on it. Well, let me say, when you own a house free and clear, you're technically not required to pay home insurance, but you should. It's smart. And if there's any HOA dues, you have to pay those. So I said, well, I realize you don't feel like those are a liability. They are an obligation you have by simply owning the property. So we have to factor those into what are called your debt ratios, which we're going to look at in a little bit and see what those are. So just to mention that even if you own a home free and clear, that's great. What a blessing that you do. And yes, you're going to get an even bigger check when you sell it, but we have to count for those taxes, insurance, HOAs, etc. Yeah, your stress level could be a little bit higher. I get it. Something to think about. A perk is it definitely eases your transition from house A to house B, for sure, because you can just stay right where you are, take your time to find the next house, figure out where your family's going to go, buy the next one, move in at your leisure. You're not stressed about the move. If you wanted to do some work to the new house before you moved in, great. All those things are possible. So there are definitely some advantages to buying before you sell when it's possible. Not possible for everyone. Where will the money come from? Now, here's what I mean is, realize that when you buy before you sell, you're still going to have a down payment you're going to need to do. Now, how much is that down payment going to be? Well, I don't know. It depends. Okay. So because you're not going to have the equity from the current house, we have to kind of think creatively here about where could we maybe tap into some money. Now, admittedly, this doesn't work for everyone. Every situation's a little bit different. But here's a couple of thoughts that we go through and we talk through with clients. Okay. They're not in any particular order, but just something to think about. Well, of course, they've got their cash, their checking, their savings. They've got investment accounts, retirement accounts. These are things that different people might have. I have a client who's got a cash value of a life insurance policy that he's able to tap into. One thing that a lot of people are not aware of is this one right here. I like to talk about this. This does not apply to everyone, But in general, if you have an investment account that is not a retirement account, okay, a retirement account, an IRA, a 401k, a 403b, this typically does not apply to those, but to just a general investment account, stocks, bonds, mutual funds, things like that. Many times that investment brokerage can arrange what's called a securities-backed line of credit, or often called an S block. Okay. Sometimes they'll say an asset-backed line of credit. Either way, same thing. Basically, what this is you are essentially doing a loan against your investment. Now, there's different rules on this, and different, investment houses do it differently. Let's say you had $100,000 in an investment account. They're typically not going to let you borrow up to $100,000 because they're going to allow for market volatility, but you're basically borrowing your own money. Maybe not necessarily what you want to do, but a nice thing about that is then you don't pay any capital gains by withdrawing that money. Many times that money, if you were to withdraw it or cash it out, you would have to pay capital gains. So it's something to seriously think about. A loan against a 401k or a retirement account. Now, let me say this is something you have to check on your current plan with, but many times, if you have a 401k or a 403b, many times with your current employer, you can typically borrow against that account up to half the value of the account, typically not to exceed $50,000. Okay. Now I realize most people go, oh, I really don't like that idea. Well, again, keep in mind, it's probably just a short-term loan. You're probably going to do that loan against the 401k. And again, half the value of the account, not to exceed $50,000. So depending on the client's account, and by the way, that it could be that it's a couple, and maybe the husband can do it and the wife can do it, whatever the situation is. So that could be technically $100,000 they could tap. It could help them buy before they sell. Again, the thought might be that they would just do that temporarily. Then when they sell their current home, they could pay that off. Family gift. Now, obviously, this doesn't apply to everyone, and there are some definite technicalities of this that I would go into more depth when I talk with a client. But I have had people who have used family money situations to maybe help with their down payment. Maybe then they repay it. I've had a situation, again, this doesn't apply to everyone, but I had a situation where the parents bought the new home. Actually, it was grandparents, I should say. They bought the new home. And then once my client sold their home, my client bought it from the parents. Again, that takes a lot of money, but that is something to consider. So just one of the different options we begin to look at when we're looking for solutions. I do want to mention a topic that sometimes comes up in this is, because I've had this question, people say, oh, can't you do a thing called a bridge loan? There is a concept called a bridge loan. However, the nuances of that don't fit most situations. There are some situations a bridge loan can help. It is meant to bridge from house A to house B. It's not that simple. It is still something someone has to qualify for. Those tend to be one of the last options we go to, but there can be some situations where that might work. But I have literally had clients say, oh, I've heard you can do that all the time. No. Not all the time. In fact, it tends to be the most rare option that we tend to find in this situation. Just wanted to mention that. Recasting. Boy, this is the best friend, or can be one of the best friends for people that buy before they sell. So I'm going to give you a high level about recasting. Recasting simply means that let's keep it simple. Say you bought a $500,000 house, and let's say you were able to buy before you sell, and you only did 10% down, $50,000. So you have a mortgage of $450,000. Well, then after you sell your other home, you're going to have maybe a windfall. Maybe you're going to have $100,000. And you would maybe like to take that money and pay down on your new home. You can totally do that. Okay. The default of that is if you pay down on it, you have shortened the length of the loan. Okay. So it's not a 30-year loan anymore. You paid down by $100,000. You've dramatically cut it. I don't know, maybe it's 20 years. Okay. Well, some people are fine with that. They like that idea. But what some people like is they would like to pay that big principal reduction and have their payment drop. Basically, kind of have immediate gratification, so to speak. Best of both worlds, pay down and have my payment drop. That can be obtainable with some loans, not all, but through a concept called recasting. Recasting is not refinancing. Okay, you don't have a new set of closing costs. But a recast, there are some special rules to this, the length of time the loan needs to be alive. I would walk people through the details of this, but bottom line is what happens is it would be arranged with the loan servicer. They pay down that big chunk, and then the mortgage payment is recalculated over the remaining life of the loan. So the loan doesn't get shorter, but the payment drops. So it's easier to explain in 1 year increments. Let's say you were at 1 year into a 30-year loan. You have 29 years left. You pay down by 100,000. So now the loan balance is 350, or probably a little less than that because you have made payments over the last year. And they will respread it over the remaining 29 years. The result is your payment's going to drop. Okay. So some people like that. Every situation's different. There's pros and cons to both. That is something that I talk about in more details with clients when we do that. So that's recasting. Now, by the way, of course, obviously, if a refinance can happen, that's a wonderful option, something to consider. It all comes down to debt ratios. This is super important that people understand this. So this is where I'm going to venture off, and I'm going to pull up a spreadsheet to show you what that kind of looks like in terms of how we run it. And this is at a high level. Pull this up. There we go. Now, this spreadsheet may be a little bit small. Do my best to kind of make it understandable. I am going to zoom in as we go. But I'll kind of walk you through. This is the math. We do it, of course, in a specialized software program, but this is really the math of it. This is a basic Excel spreadsheet. I can send this to you if you needed it or would like to see it. But let's say we put over their income in here. I'm keeping it very simple, what their salary is. Now, of course, if they're self-employed, we have to figure out, do some averaging of their income and things like that. But let's say we had a couple, this is maybe their combined gross income. When we take that and we divide it by 12, we need to get the monthly amount. Well, then we take what their monthly expenses are. Now, these are only expenses that are on their credit report. On their credit report, I realize that they have to pay their cell phone bill, their electrical bill, their water bill, natural gas. I realize those are costs that they have, but the only ones that are focused on for the mortgage world are the items on their credit report. So let's say they have a car payment. Let's say they have a student loan payment. Let's say they have a credit card balance. On the credit card balance, it's only the minimum payment that we're concerned about. Maybe they have some other installment loans or a boat or an RV, anything that they make payments on. Okay, so we just take the monthly payment. Well, then let's say that they are going to buy before they sell. Well, then we need to take their current mortgage payment. In this scenario, let's say they had a payment of $2,500 a month. And let's just say hypothetically that included taxes, insurance, and then maybe they don't have HOA dues. Now, for some people, if they pay their taxes and insurance separately, it's important that those be accounted for as well, as I've already explained. We add that up, we get to a total number. Okay, we add up those liabilities, add it to that payment, $3,400 a month. Then we go over here and we say, okay, well, what's our possible new payment on the new house? Hypothetically, say it's a $600,000 house. Say they're going to do 5% down. Figure out the taxes, the insurance, all the different parts to that. $5,322 with just 5% down. So we need to factor that number in there as well. And then what we do is we take the total of what their monthly payments are, including their current house, including the new house, and we divide that into their gross monthly income. And the result is this number right here, debt to income ratio, debt ratio. That's a very important number, okay? Now, I have purposely done this one this way intentionally because I will tell you at a 51 debt ratio, it's too high. It's going to be a problem, okay? But let me show you some very simple things that we can do to make it work. So I just use this example here, and actually let me zoom in some. That way you can see this a little better. Well, this client, as I said, they're doing 5% down. So that would mean they have monthly mortgage insurance. Anytime they buy a home and do less than 20% down, mortgage insurance is something we have to contend with in some way. Well, let's say that we didn't do monthly mortgage insurance, but maybe they have enough money that they could do what's called single premium mortgage insurance. This is a wonderful feature, doesn't apply to everyone, but basically it means they're going to raise their closing costs some, but in exchange for that, they will not have any monthly mortgage insurance ever. It's gone, obliterated. Well, maybe these folks could do that. So if we took their mortgage insurance to zero, watch what happens. That payment drops, of course. It influences our debt ratio. And while it's a high debt ratio, that in most cases would work. 49.94. Assuming a couple of positive things on their credit report and other details, that would probably work. Now, let me say, some people see that and they go, oh boy, wow, that's a high debt ratio. That's freaking me out. Well, remember, it's a temporary problem, okay? Because the whole thought is they're probably going to go sell this house. And really their reality debt ratio is like 35, okay? So that's kind of the math that I work clients through. And we look for different, when we have a debt ratio that's high, we look for different levers we can push and pull and manipulate to be able to make it work in different ways. Maybe we didn't want to do single premium mortgage insurance. Well, maybe we could do a little more down. Maybe they could do 10% down. Okay, great. That worked too. You see, there's different tricks that we can push and pull. Maybe I love this one. Cars tend to take kind of a big dent in a debt ratio, generally. Well, what if one of the cars is getting close to being paid off? Maybe they owe $6,000 on the car and they've got plenty of money. I go, hey, why don't you just pay off the car? And then we have a debt ratio that works. You see what I'm seeing? We're pushing and pulling those levers to get to the desired result. Okay. My objective here was not to have you become an expert in debt ratio, but I wanted you to understand the math that goes behind it. Okay. I hope this helps as you think through, the thoughts of buying before you sell. Let me just look here real quick. See if I've got any Q&A. Oh, here's a good one. This is a great one. Well, okay. This question, I think the question was about bridge loans and that they were told that will work. Well, the thing is we still have to be able to, let me go a little deeper on bridge loan. I think that might be good to do here. So in that bridge loan, which is basically a loan that can kind of fill a gap, there's a couple of different strategies we use. This is getting a bit in depth, but let me kind of maybe explain this. A common reason that might be done is to intentionally decrease the amount of the loan on the new home. Now, I tend to find that this may get used a little bit more when a house is a much more expensive home. You might call it a jumbo loan. Some situations we are attempting to try to avoid being in the jumbo territory. Currently, for most of the US, you are in the jumbo territory if your mortgage on the new home is over $726,200. $726,200. By the way, that number can change year to year. It's gone up the last couple of years. We'll see where it goes, for 2024. But I've seen some situations. This is a good question. Probably need to take that to some degree offline a little bit. But maybe that'll help a little bit. It's basically a way we're going to tap the equity in the current home or part of it. We're not going to get all of it, but part of it to then be able to go towards the new home. So there's a few little tricks that we try there. Anyway, I hope that helps. Let's see real quick. Any other questions that came up? Kind of talked about that. Sorry, some of these were put in there before and I'd already covered them. Yes, to address about buying a home as a rental, that is a whole separate webinar, a lot to talk about there. So we cover that one separately, but that, yes, that is a consideration we sometimes explore. Well, this is a good question. So I'm going to go ahead and cover it. The question is, what if I took my current house and Airbnb'd it? Can I count the rental? Is there a way to count rental income from the Airbnb to offset it? The short answer is no. That's the short answer. If it's on a long-term lease, say a year or more, then the answer is yes. There's some ways that we can use some of that rental income to offset it. I could give you more details on that later. That's kind of a good question. Guys, I think we've pretty much hit the core points. So buying before you sell. We're going to be talking about other topics you'll see in our webinar series. We've got topics coming up about buying and taking your current house as a rental, buying a vacation home, and a really interesting topic about buying another primary home when you have dependent parents. What does that mean? Well, let's say you have aging parents. Maybe they have some income, but they're kind of dependent on you to a degree, maybe financially, maybe just for help and aid and assistance. Well, sometimes people want to be able to help mom or dad or mom and dad or whatever. And maybe they want to have them move into their home. Of course, we could see that happen sometimes. Sometimes that creates a move to a new home. But sometimes they want to buy another home near them that mom and dad could live in. And is there a way to do that as a primary home? The major advantage of that is there's primary home, investment property, and vacation homes. And primary homes always get the lowest rates and the best down payments. So that's a great topic that we go into more depth about and how that works. Guys, I hope this is helpful. There's a QR code behind me here. If I can answer any questions, my contact info is there. Harold Smith, have a great day. I hope you can join us again in the future. Bye-bye.